June 25th, 1950. Before, the world could even heal from the deep scars of the Second World War. A new bloodbath erupted on a remote edge of Asia, the Korean Peninsula. Armed with an overwhelming onslaught of Soviet-built armor, the North Korean Communist forces stormed across the 38th parallel, launching a lightning blitzkrieg that caught the free world completely off guard. Within mere weeks, the South Korean capital of Seoul fell. Despite the frantic intervention of US-led United Nations forces, the North Korean war machine seemed unstoppable, cornered, battered, and bleeding. The Allied troops were pushed back into a suffocatingly tight pocket at the southeastern tip of this peninsula, the Pusan perimeter. If this final wall of resistance crumbled, South Korea would be permanently erased from the map. The attack upon Korea makes it plain beyond all doubt that communism has passed beyond the use of subversion to conquer independent nations and will now use armed invasion and war. Inside the Pusan perimeter, Allied soldiers were trapped like cattle in a slaughterhouse, fighting a desperate, bloody war of attrition just to survive another day. It was at this darkest hour that General Douglas MacArthur, the 71-year-old Supreme Commander of the UN forces, decided to place a high-stakes strategic gamble, one so audacious that it left the military minds at the Pentagon utterly terrified. Instead of throwing more lives directly into the meat grinder at the Pusan front, MacArthur proposed a stunning counterstroke, a massive amphibious assault at the port city of Incheon, hitting the enemy from 150 miles behind their own front lines. The Joint Chiefs of Staff vehemently opposed the plan. Incheon was a navigational nightmare. Its extreme tidal fluctuations and treacherous mudflats meant that landing crafts could easily run aground, turning American troops into sitting ducks. Admiral Forrest Sherman bluntly warned the general, if a checklist were prepared of geographical and naval handicaps, Incheon has them all. But MacArthur refused to back down. Locking eyes with his critics across the conference table, he delivered the definitive words that would seal the fate of the war. The enemy commander will reason that no one would be so brash as to make such an attempt. We shall land at Incheon, and I shall crush them. Late August 1950. In a smoke-filled briefing room in Tokyo, General Douglas MacArthur pointed his pipe at a map of Korea. His target was Incheon. To the military minds in Washington, this wasn't just a bold move, it was an invitation to disaster. The Pentagon sent its top brass across the Pacific with a single, urgent mission: talk the 71-year-old general out of his madness. The challenges were mathematically overwhelming. Incheon possessed some of the most violent tides on Earth, fluctuating by over 30 feet. When the tide went out, the harbor transformed into a vast, treacherous desert of deep mudflats. Landing crafts would be trapped in the muck, exposed and utterly defenseless for hours. There were no sandy beaches here, only towering stone seawalls that the troops would have to scale using makeshift ladders under heavy enemy fire. The history of war proves that 9 times out of 10, an army has been destroyed because its supply lines have been cut. We will plant the amphibious hook deep into the enemy's vitals. Naval experts calculated the odds of success at 1 in 5,000. General G. Lawton Collins, the Army Chief of Staff, shook his head in disbelief, calling the plan completely unacceptable. Every rule in the military textbook screamed that this operation would end in a massacre. Yet, MacArthur saw the nightmare of Incheon as his greatest weapon. He knew that because the location was so impossible, the North Koreans wouldn't safeguard it. On August 28th, after hours of agonizing debate, the silent pressure of MacArthur's absolute confidence finally broke the resistance in Washington. The Pentagon reluctantly blinked. The codename was authorized, Operation Chromite. The date was set for September 15th, the only day the tide would be high enough to float the fleet. They had exactly 45 minutes to land or be stranded and slaughtered. Early September 1950. Deep inside enemy territory, the shadows held the key to the entire invasion. To pull off the impossible landing, MacArthur needed exact, real-time data on Incheon's deadly tides and coastal fortifications. He turned to a suicide squad of South Korean naval intelligence officers and partisan guerrillas. Their top-secret mission, Operation X-Ray. Led by Lieutenant Commander Im Byung-rae, the team infiltrated Yeonghong-do, an island just off the coast of Incheon. Under the cover of pitch-black nights, these men waded into the freezing mudflats with measuring tapes, manually calculating the depth of the silt and mapping North Korean gun emplacements. Every second was a dance with death. The water is deep enough only during the peak hours of the tide. The mudflats are soft, but traction is possible near the stone walls. The enemy remains completely unaware. But intelligence was only half the battle. To ensure the North Koreans kept their backs turned, the Allies launched a massive, coordinated campaign of deception. Strategic bombers and naval fleets fiercely pounded the ports of Kunsan and Samcheok, hundreds of miles away from Incheon. UN forces even staged mock landings on distant beaches, drop-feeding false information to Soviet spies. The deception worked perfectly, but the cost was soaked in blood. Just 24 hours before D-Day, a North Korean patrol discovered the X-ray team on the island. Surrounded and facing brutal torture that would compromise the entire invasion, Lieutenant Commander Im Byung-rae ordered his men to retreat, stayed behind with a comrade, and committed suicide. His final act shielded the secret of Incheon. Midnight, September 15, 1950. The remaining scouts sneaked onto Palmido Island and lit the broken lamp of its lighthouse. It was the ultimate signal. Out in the pitch-black ocean, the greatest invasion fleet since D-Day Normandy began to move. September 15, 1950. Dawn broke over Incheon through a thick, grey mist. Floating in the treacherous waters was an armada of 261 Allied warships carrying over 70,000 troops. From the bridge of the flagship USS Mount McKinley, MacArthur watched through binoculars. 5:45 a.m. The silence of the morning was shattered by a deafening roar. Allied cruisers and rocket ships unleashed a devastating, apocalyptic bombardment onto Wolmi-do, the heavily fortified island guarding Incheon harbor. The island was literally set ablaze, transformed into a smoking crater of dirt and shrapnel. 6:30 a.m. High tide. The 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines stormed Green Beach on Wolmi-do. Landing crafts lowered their ramps and troops waded into the smoke. Within less than an hour, the Marines secured the island. But this was only the prelude. As the tide receded, the main fleet had to pull back, leaving the vanguard isolated on the island, waiting for the evening tide to return. 5:30 p.m. The sea rushed back in, and the main assault began under a heavy downpour of rain and enemy fire. At Red Beach, Marines slammed their landing crafts right against the towering stone seawalls. Stranded in the mud, soldiers clawed their way up using wooden scaling ladders. It was a chaotic, bloody scramble against gravity and machine gun fire. Miles away at Blue Beach, amphibious tractors fought through blinding smoke and treacherous mud, churning onto the shore to outflank the North Korean defenses. The deception had worked. The enemy was completely caught by surprise. Their lines of communication shattered in an instant. By the grace of a merciful providence, our forces fighting for the standard of right and freedom have liberated this ancient city of Seoul. September 16, 1950, the beachhead was secure, but the real war had just begun. Breaking out from Incheon, the Allied forces immediately pushed inland, spearheading a rapid drive toward their ultimate prize, the capital city of Seoul. The strategic goal was brutal and absolute: cut the main highway and railway networks, trapping the entire North Korean army down south at the Pusan front. Within 48 hours, American Marines captured Kimpo Airfield, the crown jewel of tactical aviation in Korea. Transport planes, immediately began landing, pouring in tons of supplies, ammunition, and fresh troops. The sky belonged to the Allies, but on the ground, the road to Seoul was turning into a highway of fire. September 22nd, the battle for Seoul began. It was not a conventional surrender. The North Korean forces had dug into every concrete building, every hidden basement, and every alleyway. They fought with a fanatical desperation, turning the ancient city into a hellish maze of urban warfare. House by house, block by block, Marines had to clear the city with flamethrowers, hand grenades, and raw courage. Snipers hidden in the ruins turned every intersection into a death trap. The air was thick with the stench of burning cordite and decomposing bodies. September 27th, after 5 days of brutal, unrelenting urban butchery, the American flag was finally raised over the heavily damaged U.S. Embassy. The following day, MacArthur hand-delivered the ruined capital back to South Korean President Syngman Rhee amid the weeping of traumatized citizens. By the grace of a merciful providence, our forces fighting for the standard of right and freedom have liberated this ancient city of Seoul. The triumph at Incheon did not bring peace. It fueled a dangerous illusion. Blinded by success, General MacArthur believed he was invincible. Ignoring warnings, he pushed UN forces straight to the Chinese border. Incheon remains a masterpiece of military strategy, yet its political aftermath prolonged the agony of a nation. It cemented the tragic division of the Korean Peninsula, bleeding scar that remains unhealed to this day. Incheon remains a masterpiece of military strategy, yet its political aftermath prolonged the agony of a nation. It cemented the tragic division of the Korean Peninsula, bleeding scar that remains unhealed to this day.